5 shapes up to be a pretty interesting one from a DFS perspective because our process in NFL DFS is to stack tight games, load up on those, build around those game stacks, and go from there. But in week 5, it's kind of hard to find those games that we want to stack. So we got to go through today, try to find games that grade out well, and identify the best plays for NFL DFS. Welcome on into the Heat Check Fantasy Podcast, powered by numberFire. That's right here on the FanDuel Podcast Network and numberFire.com. My name is Jim Sonis. I am a senior writer and analyst for numberFire.com. Joined here, as always, by Brandon Gadula. He is the managing editor for numberFire. Brandon, we are on to week 5. How you doing today?
Well, I told you I was going to throw you a curveball, and I'm going to ask the question that everybody's asking themselves right now. How are you doing?
I don't know, man.
You always ask me how I'm doing. I never know how I'm doing, so I figured I'd ask you how you're doing.
It's a weird time to ask that question. I'm trying to house train a puppy.
Yeah.
I'm trying to, maintain mental sanity through a lot of weird stuff going on in the world. So I've been using football as a way to avoid all that. But now we've got the Titans practicing through a pandemic when they're not supposed to. We've got Stephon Gilmore hugging it up with Patrick Mahomes when he's not supposed to. So I'm a little skittish, and I wish you wouldn't ask me how I'm doing.
Well, you asked me, so I needed to. And I never know how I'm doing. I never.
I mean, fair. I see. But I get why that question is so hard now.
Yeah, it's like, do I just talk about the slate? Do I talk about, anything else? I mean, it's...
You talk about getting peed on at 2:30 in the morning? I mean, teach their own, but I'm not a huge fan of that, just like,
what?
That's what the puppy. Come on.
No.
It happens. And you thought this was going to be an adult podcast there. You had no idea where this is going. How is Brandon doing now?
There's not enough context in the conversation.
Again, to each their own. If that's what makes you happy, that's what makes you happy. Do you for sure? Personally, it's not a favorite thing of mine. Also, not a favorite thing of mine is using players in games that have one-sided spreads. But for this week, we're going to have to do that. That's going to be a talking point throughout the day for today. We're going to break down this slate, talk about some trends, talk about overarching things impacting this slate, and also some games that actually do grade out well from a stacking perspective. But first, got to remind you to get yourself entered into our Week 5 Listener League. The Week 5 FanDuel Podcast Network Listener League is posted. The sizing was increased this week after you all filled it last week, so kudos to you. It is still just a $5 entry fee with 3 entries max, so you can check it out regardless of your bankroll size. It is also rake-free, so FanDuel makes no money off of this. All the entry fees go right back to you, the listeners. To enter, go to FanDuel.com/league/listener league. That's FanDuel.com/league/listener league. I've also got a link to it in the podcast post of the Week 4 recap and the Week 5 preview on numberFire.com. At FanDuel.com/league/listener league. $5 entry, 3 entries max, no rake. Eligibility restrictions apply. So let's take a look at our slate overview here for week number 5. And the 2 big questions for me are, how do we handle the teams that are heavily favored? Because again, our process stems from targeting close games. There are only 2 games on the slate with spreads of less than 6.5 points, which is my nightmare. Also, do we actually load up on the mid-range running backs who all seem to kind of grade out well? Guys like Kareem Hunt, Mike Davis. I guess that's kind of it. But do we load up on those guys and take those savings? And what do we do with said savings? That's where I'm at, Brandon. What are the key questions for you on the Week 5 main slate?
Yeah, I think the big one, the main one is going to be which games defy the spread and actually stay close and are back and forth, which is always kind of a foolish endeavor to think that you know which one that is because, historically speaking, spreads are pretty accurate over a large sample. And obviously some of these games will not play exactly to the spread. But, I think we all need to be cautious and be aware of the fact that some of these games we're going to get wrong. So I think that's a big thing. We want to plant our flag in certain games, but not be overconfident necessarily. And I think some other big questions are, do we really need to spend salary on the wide receivers at the top? There aren't many this week, but you alluded to the mid-range running backs already. So I think Wide receiver is going to be interesting at the top because there are a lot of viable, a lot of interesting, and frankly, just a lot of good plays in the mid range and honestly the low end at wide receiver. And then just a third thing, which is always kind of an afterthought for me, but tight end.
Yeah.
Tight end's been pretty messy this year. We have a lot of big name tight ends on the slate. You and I usually don't prioritize the highest salaried tight ends, but typically we're also rostering Christian McCaffrey at like 10.5. We're rostering Ezekiel Elliott at 9,000, which we're going to do again. But there aren't 2 or 3 of those guys necessarily this week. So do we use that savings and play one of the high-priced tight ends? And I think the answer for me is yes.
Yeah, and we got Travis Kelce, we got Mark Andrews, George Kittle, Darren Waller. That hurts. That is what it is. But there are a lot of tempting tight ends. And to the point you were making about salaries, there is not a single player on the slate with a salary higher than $9,000. Mahomes and Zeke are both there. Zeke's a good play again.
Yes.
But like you said, like outside of that, we're not jamming. Like last week, it was you get 2 out of 3 between Kamara, Zeke, and Dalvin Cook, and then you figure out the rest from there. This week, like there isn't really a second high salary back I want to use. Derrick Henry may not even play. Like that game may not happen.
Yeah.
Josh Jacobs is a 2, but a huge underdog against Kansas City. Nick Chubb is out. Clyde Edwards-Helaire probably going to play. I would bet he's a good play, but he's 79. So like, there's not a lot.
And then that's it. Yeah, it's Miles Sanders after that, and then Jonathan Taylor. Sanders is 75. Taylor's 7-1. So like, they're just frankly aren't those plays. So I think some of that salary should be allocated toward tight end. It doesn't have to be, not in every lineup, but I think it's a week for me to take a step back and really look at tight end longer than I usually do.
I think that's a very fair way to put it. Maybe we spend up at defense more too. I think that we'll have salary to burn. We just have to decide where is the wisest place to put it. It's probably not a defense, but like I think Kittle definitely could be interesting. We're going to take a look at some injuries now, but before we do that, we have to go through the COVID stuff because there are a lot of games in limbo right now. The Patriots-Broncos game seems okay because we do have Cam Newton and Stephon Gilmore testing positive. However, there were no positives for the Patriots on Thursday. So I guess it seems like that game will play. Raiders-Chiefs, there's only been, I think, 2 positives between those 2 teams. One was Jordan Ta'amu. Shout out to the XFL podcast. And then a defensive tackle for the Raiders also tested positive. That one seems like it should play too. I would probably put about 20% odds that Bills-Titans play because the Titans had 2 more positives on Thursday. So make sure you're up to speed on that. Just quickly going through some injury notes for those games. For the Broncos, Drew Lock did return to practice on Wednesday, which means they're now a top 5 offense. If he goes, though, he'll be joined by Phillip Lindsay, but be without Noah Fant and KJ Hamler. The reason I liked Lock going into the year was because he'd have Noah Fant, KJ Hamler, Cortland Sutton, Jerry Jeudy. He only has one of those guys left, so we'll be back on Drew Lock eventually, just not right now. The Patriots currently don't have Cam Newton or Stephon Gilmore. Cam could, in theory, potentially be cleared by Sunday, but I would probably assume it's going to be Brian Hoyer or Jarrett Stidham, LOL. The Raiders seem likely to get Henry Ruggs back this week after he was limited on Wednesday. Brian Edwards still not practicing, though, so he'll probably be out. Zach Moss limited for the Bills. He was limited last week, but ultimately did wind up sitting. John Brown missed practice on Wednesday, too. And the Titans have Corey Davis and Adam Humphries on the COVID list. A.J. Brown was able to return to practice after missing the 2 games before their bye. So if they play, they might get A.J. Brown back. But honestly, I don't see it happening. So let's talk about some other games here. Not an injury, but Washington is making Kyle Allen its starter over Dwayne Haskins. They're facing the Rams. I'm probably just not going at any Washington players because I don't think Kyle Allen is an upgrade. What about you?
I don't think he's a downgrade.
It's just a lateral move.
Yeah. Terry McLaurin, 63, I think.
He's going to see Jalen Ramsey, though, and I don't want that.
9.8 targets per game. He's what I was getting at, Jim, before you cut me off.
Sorry.
Was just that
this is the debate. I can cut you off as many times as I want. There are no moderators. Cal is not going to moderate us, so I'm good.
Yeah, Cal, mute Jim next time he cuts me off. But yeah, I mean, McLaurin, just from a volume standpoint, is really the only football teamer. Is that
I just say Washington player. I don't mess around with the football team thing. It's so stupid. It's just Washington. They've been Washington for me for the past decade. I'm not going to change it now.
I like the football team, but anyway, McLaurin is I think the only one you could really even make a case for, and I'm really not that in on him because the salary is not low enough. There are a lot of wide receivers in that range.
Yep. In that same game, Cam Akers was back to a limited practice on Wednesday. He's likely to return this week. They're facing Washington. Chase Young didn't practice on Wednesday, but it's a three-headed backfield. I think I know where you stand here, so we can move on. One of the actual fun games this week, we have the Falcons facing the Panthers, but the Falcons likely without Julio Jones. He didn't practice on Wednesday. We'll talk more about the implications of that. In the trend section, Kareem Hunt was able to get in a limited session with his groin injury on Wednesday. Last week, he did not practice at all until Friday, so how are you viewing Hunt in his matchup with the Colts as of now?
Yeah, I mean, assuming he plays, I think he's salary considered potentially the best running back play. I mean, I'm gonna play a lot of Ezekiel Elliott. I'm gonna play a lot of Clyde Edwards-Helaire so long as that game goes. But I think Hunt is just
you missed one.
Well, Mike Davis.
Yeah, of course.
Well, I mean,
the best salary considered running back on the slate, except for Zeke. I think it's Zeke 1, Davis 2, Hunt 3.
Cow, you got that meat bun? Yeah, I think it's those four, and I think that's what running back is. It's really difficult for me this week, and obviously I'm not going to play only 4 running backs, but it's going to be 3 of those 4 in a single game or cash game lineup for me.
I feel great about those. I feel great about Kareem Hunt right now. I will feel amazing about him if he gets into full practice on Friday and is taken off the injury report. That would make me feel amazing about him. So right now, very good. Could be even better by the time we get to Friday, though. Sam Darnold's shoulder is hurt, so Joe Flacco is likely to start for the Jets this week. Oh, boy. They may get Le'Veon Bell back, and Jamison Crowder is able to practice in full on Wednesday, but it's still Flacco. There's no Brashad Perriman. There's no Denzel Mims yet. So are you going at any Jets in their matchup with Arizona?
I would go only at Jamison Crowder. He's had an amazing role in his 2 healthy games, 11.5 targets, 29% of the targets, 2 downfield targets per game too, as well. So that's about it. I don't even know what his salary is because I'm not.
It's 63. And we talk about how like guys in the mold of Crowder often do not have a lot of upside, both because of the fact that he's a slot receiver and because of the offense in which he plays. But like he is actually, like you said, the 2 deep targets, that's good. He also has topped 100 receiving yards in both games he's played. So I think that Crowder is actually in play. Like if you're going DeAndre Hopkins, I would say game stacking him with Crowder is not a terrible option, despite the fact that it's Flacco.
Yeah, he's the only one, I think, from the Jets you could even bring back with.
You're not chomping at the bit to go. Is it
champing?
Champing at the bit. Thank you. I knew it was wrong. Champing at the bit to go with Jeff Smith.
I mean, not on a. Well, I was going to say a 12-game slate, but who knows how many games we'll get.
I was joking. You don't need to go with Jeff Smith. I think there are better options. If you want to go super low, we'll talk about later. Jeff Smith had 9 targets, looked pretty good, but it's just I don't want to get low salary exposure to the Jets offense. I'd rather get low salary exposure to a better offense. Jimmy Garoppolo got in a limited practice session on Wednesday. Likely puts him in line to return this week. Raheem Mostert was also limited, so he may be able to return. They're at home against Miami. So how are you viewing the 49ers offense here?
So according to OddsFire, this is one of 2 games out of 10 on the main slate that has data that has sharp money on the over, which was a little surprising to me, but I definitely can see it. I think we're both on the Ryan Fitzpatrick can always make a game fun. It can always go terribly, but
he can make it go drastically one way or the other.
So I do like this game. I would love Jarek if Raheem Mostert doesn't play. I love George Kittle either way. I don't know where I am with Brandon Ayuk yet, but if I like this game, I feel pretty solid about who I would go with on the 49er side.
Yeah, I think where would you put Jarek? Let's assume Mostert does not play because Jarek was a bell cow last week. He had like 8 targets, played like 90% of the snaps. I would say if Mostert, like if you told me now Mostert will not play, I would say Jerick McKinnon would be in that top 5 at running back then?
Yeah,
Would he be number 5 to you?
He'd be 5th for me.
Okay.
I would. Spoiler alert! Just going through the running back loves, we each have to pick 3. Obviously, we both have 4. Jim got 3 of the 4, so I was really struggling.
You took all the receivers first, so I got to take all the running backs.
Yeah, I know, but I'm just saying, like, it's so hard to figure out who's 5th, and it would be probably Jarek. I would consider Devin Singletary if no Zach Moss and that game plays, but I'm just that's
He's not legally allowed to score 20 points.
That's what we're looking at.
No,
is it going to be Kenyon Drake?
I don't know. I don't know.
I'm saying I
don't want to use anyone. I would say that Jarek would be in the same tier as those initial 4. Would you agree with that?
It would be very close. I'd put him at the bottom of the tier, but it would be very close.
Okay, cool. I'm on board with that. Deshaun Jackson got back to a limited practice on Wednesday for the Eagles after missing week 4. J.J. Arcega-Whiteside and Alshon Jeffrey also practice. In that same game, Juju Smith-Schuster and Deontay Johnson didn't practice on Wednesday, but they've been held out of Wednesday practices in previous weeks too, so I think they're good to go. But are you taking a swing at Deshaun Jackson here against a really tough Steelers defense?
I'm anticipating some bad offense from the Eagles. Carson Wentz has been very problematic. The Steelers defense is very good.
Yes. Steelers defense is also a good DFS play. With that said, let's dive into our trends discussion here for week number 5. And Brandon, we're going to start things off here with the thing we talked about the Open as being a focal point for this slate, trying to dissect how we handle games with wide spreads. Because as mentioned, only 2 games to the spread of less than 6.5 points. You're going to look at what big favorites have done in the past, and if we can still get upside out of them, despite the fact their games may not be back and forth. So what did you see when you dug in there?
Yeah, I looked at games with spreads of 7 or more, but I think that if you drop it down half point, this will still apply. But it's difficult to figure out what big spreads mean because it depends on how you look at things. Obviously, there are going to be outlier performances that buck the trend, but and obviously that means that if you apply just kind of what happens on average to a single week, it's not going to be that predictive. But I do think for this week specifically, it's worth looking in to how games have fared whenever there have been big spreads of at least 7. But, from 2016 through 2019 in the regular season, in games with spreads of 6.5 either way, so the closer games, players have averaged about 99% of their pregame projection on numberFire, which means 2 things. 1, numberFire projections are very good. And 2, when games are tight, players over a large sample play to their expectation. In games where players were favored by 7 or more, they average 100% of their pregame projections over that large sample. Wide receivers actually go over a little bit. I think it was like 102%. So again, specifically, I think that means that numberFire does a good job of adjusting, but more importantly, players who are favorites typically hit their expectation. But players who are 7-point underdogs or larger usually fall short over that large sample. Running backs, quarterbacks, and wide receivers are at about 92 to 93% of their projected FanDuel point total. Running backs have put up 91% actually in those games. So, what that means to me is that players can hit their expectation in close games, and whenever teams are actually putting up the points, they're obviously coming through the guys who we project to do well. But on the flip side, whenever games get out of hand, it's the underdogs who struggle to meet expectations. So that's problematic for me, for one thing, for this week. But as far as ceilings go, I wanted to see how hard they were to find from these games with higher spreads. So I looked at games, I know it's arbitrary, but 25-point FanDuel games from quarterbacks, 20 plus for running backs and receivers, and 15 or more for tight ends. To me, those are big games at those positions. They're easy to work with. And of the big quarterback games over the past 4 seasons, 22% of them came from big favorites. So players on teams favored by at least 7 entering the game. But just 14% of games actually featured a spread that big for a team. So that's a disproportionate number there of big games coming from heavily favored quarterbacks. Big underdog quarterbacks had a big game only 7% of the time. I think there's that, I think there's still a little bit of that garbage time narrative with quarterbacks, and that's just not how quarterbacks put up fantasy points. a quarterback's about 3 times more likely to go for 25 FanDuel points if he's a big favorite compared to if he's a big underdog, because efficiency matters. And really that kind of sticks across positions. 20% of those big games at the 3 flex positions came when players were heavily favored, again, compared to about 14% of the times where a team is actually favored by that much. And only about 8.5% of the time did the big games come from the huge underdogs at those flex spots. So, I mean, this shouldn't sound like big news, but I think it's pertinent for a few reasons. The first being that we usually talk about game stacks to find correlated plays, to find upside from back and forth games. If we don't have back and forth games to pick from, which we really don't this week, I think it's vital that we aren't too heavy on underdog teams, because historically they underperform their expectation. So I'm likely to be light on the underdogs. I think another takeaway here is that big favorites still can and still do hit expectation. They put up big games as well, despite logic maybe suggesting that game script will lead to pulled starters or, milking the clock. So I think that we shouldn't necessarily fear favored wide receivers so long as their teams throw at a usable rate. So unlike teams like the Ravens, I think another takeaway is that, again, quarterbacks playing with positive scripts put up big games because, again, we need efficiency, not volume for big games from quarterbacks. You need that high single game touchdown rate for breakout games from quarterbacks in a single week. So my takeaways, again, basically, it's not maybe a game stack week so much as it is stacking the favorites, because it makes a lot of sense to me that works out. And it checks out in the data. So what are your takeaways from this slate as a whole? Because I think this is more of a game theory week than it is identifying the best matchups because of how the spreads play out.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I think that your discussion around the underdogs is the part where I am like fist pumping, I agree, because I am okay with game stacking like Cowboys Giants or game stacking Texans Jaguars, but I don't want to have both quarterbacks in those games. It would be either Dak or Deshaun. I don't want Minshew or Daniel Jones. So I very much agree there. And I am okay with ignoring underdogs for the most part. If I'm not game stacking, I think I'll probably skew towards the favorites there. The other thing that I kind of dug into was what archetype of player tends to do well when favored. And this is looking back at perfect lineups from last year. So it's a small sample, but I wanted to see which quarterbacks who were heavily favored wound up making it. And if you look back at last year, there were 9 quarterbacks who were favored by 5+ points who made a perfect lineup. They averaged, quick math, 10.5 more rushing yards per game and 0.2 more rushing touchdowns per game. So basically, they got more volume via rushing. So if I'm going to target a heavily favored quarterback, I want them to run. So that's Dak, that's Deshaun, that's Lamar Jackson. That's kind of where I'm at there. So I have good players I could turn to when making that assumption. For running back and receiver, it's similar, but in a weird way. It's because you want that efficient volume. For running backs, that means targets. I know it's counterintuitive to think that heavily favored running backs would need targets, but they do. If you look at the heavily favored running backs are favored by 5 or more points last year in perfect lineups. There were only 8, actually. Most running backs came from tight games. But 8 out of 45 running backs were favored by 5 or more. They averaged 5 receptions per game. The running backs not favored by 5 or more averaged 4.3 receptions per game. So there was a decent uptick in pass catching volume. So if I want to go at a running back who is favored, I want them to get receiving volume. So Zeke gets receiving volume. We talked about Jerick McKinnon. He gets receiving volume. I can definitely get behind that. So I think that definitely helps. Then Clyde Edwards-Helaire gets receiving volume too. So I think that definitely works. And at receiver, they average more yards per reception. So it's like big play guys, kind of like we've talked about a lot of the podcasts, where you want to target high average depth of target receivers when they're at home and favored. This backs that up because the more heavily favored wide receivers averaged 19.3 yards per reception, whereas the less heavily favored perfect wide receivers were at 16.4. So a gap of 2.9 yards per reception. So if I'm targeting a heavily favored player, I want a quarterback who runs. I want a running back who catches passes, and I want a wide receiver who gets downfield targets. So I am on board with you, and I just wanted to expand on it by saying which kinds of heavily favored players I want, but I think you're on the right page here broadly. Do you agree with the archetype stuff I'm pushing at you?
Yeah, I think it makes sense. And I think that it goes a little bit counter to what we might think because sometimes rushing quarterbacks feel like they have more juice whenever they're trailing, and they'll be able to just kind of pick up some cheap runs for 10, 15 yards here and there. As far as running backs go, it makes sense because typically we think favored running backs just need that 25 carry, 22 carry type of game, but it's all about efficiency in these games, especially because in single games, what leads to upside is having a really efficient one game sample, which everyone can kind of do. But that comes obviously from running back. I mean, we know that a target on average at running back is worth twice as much as a carry. We know downfield targets are worth more than just your average short target for wide receivers. So what we have to do is figure out where the efficiency will come from. That's always it's basically impossible for a one game sample. But what we know anecdotally is that these can come from teams expected to score more, be more efficient. And so I think the ultimate takeaway from me is I'm not even digging into matchups so much this week in single games. I just want to figure out the best favorites for me. And that's not to say I won't play anybody on an underdog. That's not the case. It's not like I won't have any game stacks, but it's more
We're skewing less towards game stacks than usual.
Less toward game stacks and more toward just loading up on favorites who can be efficient.
I'm on the same page, so I agree. I think that's the right way to play things here just because there's literally only two games that are not that way. My first trend is looking at early defensive numbers because we are actually weirdly a quarter of the way through the season, meaning we've got at least a decent sample on what each team is going to look like, both on offense and on defense. So I went back and looked at last year's numbers through week 4 at numberFire and compared them to the end of season numbers, and the correlation between each team's overall adjusted defensive metrics through week 4 and their end of season mark was 0.549. It's a pretty strong number. It was 0.609 in pass defense and 0.564 in rush defense. So we're going to see teams move between now and the end of the season. Obviously, it was not a perfect correlation, but we can at least get some strong indication of which teams figure to be a plus the rest of the way. And I think that the reason I wanted to specifically dig into this is that there are noteworthy defenses involved in some of the projected tighter games this week. Namely, it's the Colts and the Browns. The Colts are first in schedule-adjusted defense right now, according to numberFire's metrics, and they're facing the Browns in a game with the muted total, I would say, which is why it doesn't stand out as being a game stack, but it is a tight spread, and I'm still interested in stacking it despite the total being muted. The Browns faced a tough defense back in week 1. The Ravens stumped them pretty good, but the Colts have not faced a super tough schedule in terms of quarterbacks. They've gone up against Gardner Minshew, Kirk Cousins, Sam Darnold, and Nick Foles. And the Browns offense, say what you want about Baker Mayfield, but they are ranked 6th in the league once you adjust for schedule based on numberFire's metrics. And I think that's high enough where I can still use them despite the Colts defense. The other reason I'm okay with this is that the Browns offensive line is playing really well this year, and the strength of the Colts defense is their defensive line. I can get behind that. So I am okay with the Browns, and I'm okay with stacking that game, even though defensive numbers, we have a large enough sample where they're kind of sticky, and that total is not very high. The Browns, moving to the other game here is Atlanta versus Carolina. Atlanta's defense is 19th adjusted for schedule. Carolina is 17th. What's interesting to me, though, is that Carolina is the 10th best offense once you adjust for schedule. And against Atlanta's defense, I think they're going to score a lot of points. So I think there are 3 takeaways for me here from looking at these defensive numbers. The first one is that defensive metrics are not fully stabilized yet, but they can give us a good signal on what to expect. Second, the Browns offense seems pretty legit, and I think we should be willing to trust them against Indy. Indy's offense is in play too. I just got to find the right way to go at it. Third, the Panthers may actually be the preferred side of that game between the Falcons and the Panthers. But I think the more controversial thing here, we're going to talk about the Panthers later on. So I think the more controversial thing here is I want to stack Cleveland Indy at times. Are you on board with that, or does Indy's defense scare you off, or other things scare you off?
So I'm not on team defenses don't matter. but I think they matter most whenever it's an outlier. And I don't know yet if the Colts are an outlier, like outlier-ishly good defense based on who they've faced. And I think what we'll probably get is a little bit of popularity leverage, because I think people are still down on the Browns offense, despite Baker having pretty good metrics, having pretty good pass protection. I think they're currently third in pressure rate allowed among teams on the main slate.
That's despite facing the Ravens in week 1.
Yeah. So I'm with you. I like the Browns. The problem is it's one of the few possible game stack situations.
Yeah.
But how do you really bring it back with
Well, I think I've been thinking about this because I was looking at the Colts numbers, and since week 1, they have had only one player get more than 6 targets in a game, and that was Zach Pascal last week. The Browns' pass defense has been bad, in part because their corner's been banged up. But, do you actually want to use T.Y. Hilton? Because I don't. But I think the route to do so may be via Jonathan Taylor. I am really down on Taylor right now. Really down. Because he has not run more than 20 routes yet in a game this year. He just happened to get targeted at a crazy high rate in week 1, and that allowed us to assume he'd be this fixture in the passing game. He has not had that. He's averaging 21 adjusted opportunities per game over the full season, which is, it's not great. Over the past 3, I think it's 20. It's still the same number. So I'm not high on him. However, he is the Colts player in whom I have the most confidence in getting volume. It's also not as if he's been bad. He's had 17. He had 17 carries last week. He had 13 carries in that weird game the week before that against the Jets. I think if I'm game stacking it, I might just stack the running backs and go with Kareem Hunt and Jonathan Taylor. But it is tough. That's the reason why it's tough to stack this game, because I really don't want to use Pascal. I really don't want to use T.Y. Hilton. I'm like I said, I'm down on Jonathan Taylor, but I think that he is the most logical way. So I will have some Beckham too. I think that Odell Beckham, the way to attack this Indy defense is go at their corners. So Beckham, I think, makes sense as well. He's getting enough. His target share is high enough to partially mitigate the lack of passing volume on that team. So I would say, I don't know if I'll get to either quarterback, but I would like to have mini stacks of this game revolving around Kareem Hunt, Odell Beckham, and Jonathan Taylor.
Yeah, what I was going to ask you is, whenever we talk game stacks, it's kind of is it a both quarterback game stack where you want access to both quarterbacks? Is it just one, or is it neither?
Yeah.
I think it's probably neither for me this week. Just the Colts they just share the ball a lot. Nobody played more than 75% of the snaps last week. Even if you look at tight end, Jack Doyle, Trey Burton, Mo Alley.
Trey Burton ran 10 more routes than Mo Alley Cox last week. What the heck?
Yeah. I think Mo Alley Cox ran, 7 routes?
He ran 7, Burton ran 17. I know, because that number is it's a cursed image in my brain.
Yeah. I don't want to play Zach Pascal, but he did have 3 downfield targets last week out of his 8.
I would say that the odds that I wind up with a non-zero number of shares of Zach Pascal are high.
I can't follow that. So you're going to play some Pascal?
Yes, thank you.
Okay.
That's a way clearer way to say that. But if I get to 10%, I will find ways to divest.
Yeah, he's going to be someone you have to, if you do an optimizer, cap that. But yeah, just to give my thoughts on Jonathan Taylor, it's not a great running back slate. Again, my top 4 were taken, and I still couldn't really get to a process-driven case for Jonathan Taylor.
It's an assumption-based case where I assume this game stays close throughout, and that's not a process. That is a process, but it's not the optimal process.
Yeah.
How low would T.Y. Hilton's salary need to be for you to consider him?
I don't even know what he is now, because I don't.
No, don't look. Just how low would it need to be for you to consider him?
What? Like, again, I haven't really looked at this offense because they've just been so kind of bland. He's got an 18% target share, which is 5.5 per game. Oh my god!
He has not had more than 53 receiving yards in a game yet this year.
He'd probably have to be like a 53 or something.
He's 57. Zach Pascal's 53 though. Heads up, T.Y. Hilton or Zach Pascal? Who you got? T.Y. Hilton or Trey Burton? Who you got?
I mean, you have to go Pascal, right, over Hilton because it's not in Indy.
T.Y. Hilton or Olamide Zaccheaus?
Zaccheaus.
Okay, speaking of him, let's move to the Atlanta versus Carolina game. You're going to talk about Atlanta's offensive market shares and discuss how we're viewing this one. What do you see when you dig in there under the assumption that Julio Jones is not playing?
Yeah, I've kind of wanted to look at the Falcons for a while now. It's one of the few games with that close spread between the Falcons and Panthers. I think it's going to be like the number one obvious game stack of the week. But I wanted to dig into the Falcons at home in a dome. Their offense has an implied team total of 28 points. I definitely think it's justifiable, but it's one of those offenses right now where it's a little messy and we need to dig through and see what's up. So on Monday night, the wide receivers were a bit of a mess. Calvin Ridley, who was questionable going into the game with the hamstring injury, had 5 targets but no catches. He played 64% of the snaps. 3 of his 5 targets were at least 16 yards downfield. His average depth of target, or ADOT, was 19.6 yards downfield. He's gotten a lot of downfield looks this year. There's going to be volatility in his profile for sure, but I'm not necessarily scared based on what he put up on Monday night. Julio Jones, after missing in week 3, caught all 4 of his targets with an average target depth of 3 yards. Played 21% of the snaps before not returning at the half. Assuming he's not playing this week, that opens up a lot, and I think that's where this conversation gets interesting. Russell Gage had 3 targets on a 67% snap rate, but leading the team was Olamide Zaccheaus with 9 targets. Hayden Hurst had 6, and then Ridley and Christian Blake had 5 targets each. If you look at the market shares without Julio for effectively 2 weeks now, Ridley leads the team with 23% of the targets, which is 9 per game, 44% of the air yards with 5 downfield targets per game. It's an insane workload. It's really hard to nitpick Calvin Ridley. Olamide Zaccheaus has a 20% target share in those 2 games with 1.5 downfield targets per game. Christian Blake, just Monday's game here for him, had 13% of the targets to rank 3rd in the sample, but had 3 downfield targets on 5 overall targets, which is pretty nice. But Hayden Hurst, you would think, would be possibly more involved. That could get a bump, but he's at 12% of the targets the past 2 weeks, again, with Julio either out or very limited. That's only 4.5 targets per game, but he does have 1.5 downfield targets. He has 1 total red zone target in those 2 games as well. So it gets a little shaky outside of Ridley. Obviously, if Ridley's fully healthy, he's the obvious number 1. I think he's a great play even at the salary for him this week. But after that, it gets a little precarious. Zaccheaus might be number 1, but Gage did run 77% of the routes on Monday. I don't want to forget about Russell Gage so long as he's good to go. Zaccheaus, though, 4,800 salary for him on FanDuel. Gage, 56. Hurst is problematic. He's not overly involved, but his salary is only 5,700 in a very promising spot. And then, I mean, if I'm talking Falcons offensive target or market shares overall, I got to at least look at Todd Gurley. He's played he's played 46, 64, 52, and 54% of the snaps. So usually the kind of workload we try to ignore. He's 22nd in adjusted opportunities per game among running backs. He is 3rd in red zone carries per game, though. He's just not really involved in the passing game at all. But Carolina, 22nd in rushing net expected points per carry and rushing success rate allowed to back. So it's not the worst spot for Gurley to get like a touchdown or 2. If we like this game, I'm definitely not prioritizing Todd Gurley, but talk to me about this Falcons offense because I think they're going to be a big key to how week 5 plays out.
It's tough because like I want to be super, super high on them, but I agree where it's like very difficult to dissect their market shares because Calvin Ridley is awesome. I agree with you. I would expect him to be volatile, but have crazy upsides. So I think that I'm going to go back to Ridley this week, and I'm very okay with that. The salary is high, but I'm going to have that salary to burn this week. So Ridley is definitely number one. The question that I have is, do I rank Zacchaeus higher than Russell Gage? Because like neither of them profile as being high upside wide receivers. Zacchaeus does have the higher ADOT. His ADOT is actually over 10, whereas Gage is pretty well below that. So, and I think that Zacchaeus actually has more deep targets this year than Gage does, even though Gage has played 3.5 games, whereas Zacchaeus has effectively played 2. So I think I go Ridley 1, Hurst 2. I think I need to go with Hurst 2, despite the, like you said, the unappealing profile. Zacchaeus probably 3, but like my confidence drops off really quickly after Ridley. So I want to go here. It's just tough. What about Matt Ryan though? Matt Ryan has struggled in the 2 games with no Julio, but it's against the Bears and the Packers. The Packers, like their whole defensive philosophy is sell out to stop the pass. Like who cares if you run on us? So I view those as being tougher matchups. Carolina has done relatively well this year. As mentioned, they're around 17th in overall defense. But it's also tough to expect huge efficiency when you don't have a guy like Julio Jones. So where do you sit on Matt Ryan?
So Ryan's like not, if Julio was fully healthy and this was, the Julio of old, I think Ryan at this salary of 7,700 in this matchup would be like cash game consideration.
Yeah.
I don't really see it this week. He's just a game stack option for me. There are a lot of reasons to be concerned because, look, no matter how much you like Calvin Ridley or Hayden Hurst or Russell Gage, it's like not the most appealing offense, and that always lowers me on a quarterback when I'm not just like over the moon about who he has to throw to. So I think Ryan is really just another tournament option for me. Probably near the top of the list, but definitely not a cash game option for me.
He's not my favorite option, but like I think that he's an option I'll use. He's currently in my player picks. I may rethink that. Teddy or Ryan?
Teddy
or Ryan? Who do you prefer?
I think I said Tanny.
No.
I would go.
Tanny's been canceled.
Yeah, I would go Teddy, honestly. The salary is really low, 7,100.
The skill position guys are better right now.
Yeah. Great matchup. I would lean, if I had to play one in a cash game, it would be Teddy.
I think I agree. Let's move on here to my second trend then and talk about that Jacksonville-Houston game, because the other route to a higher scoring game is targeting 2 horrendous pass defenses, because if the pass defense is bad, teams will be more inclined to throw on them. And there, when you throw, it's either a completion or a clock stoppage, both of which are good for DFS. And we get that matchup in Houston as they face the Jags. This is the only game on the slate with 2 teams in the bottom 10 of the league against the pass, according to numberFire's metrics. Buffalo, Tennessee is close, but I'm just kind of assuming that game is not going to play. The Jags are dead freaking last against the pass this year, and by a pretty decent mark. The Texans are 28th. So we should see both teams throw the ball efficiently here, and they should pass often enough. Both teams are above average in early down pass rate in the first half, according to Sharp Football Stats. The Texans are 4th in that metric. We don't really know how things will change with Romeo Crennel taking over for Bill O'Brien, but their offensive coordinator, Tim Kelly, is still there, so I'd expect they're probably going to be pretty stable from what we've seen previously. So I'm willing to stack this game up. On the Texans side, it obviously starts with Will Fuller. I'm willing to take stabs in game stacks at Brandon Cooks and Jordan Akins. Akins didn't practice Wednesday with a concussion. He might not play. I'm not going Darren Fells if he doesn't. Maybe David Johnson, kind of a tough sell for me. The Jaguars are tougher. DJ Chark got big volume last week, but he has to face Bradley Roby here. So James Robinson might be my favorite route at $6,600. He is up to 22.5 adjusted opportunities per game, and he's at 24 over the past 3 weeks. That'll work in game stacks. And beyond Chark, I'm kind of interested in Laviska Shenault. He was limited on Wednesday with a hamstring injury, which caused him to miss, I believe, the 4th quarter on Sunday. technically Keelan Cole was running more routes even before that, and he's playing more snaps, but Shenault has 34 more air yards on 3 fewer targets than Cole. Cole has not topped 60 yards yet this year, while Shenault had 86 last week despite the injury. So if I had one game stack, I would go Deshaun, Fuller, James Robinson. Chark would be a close second despite the Roby matchup. How are you viewing this game? Is it one you're looking to stack, or what are you seeing here?
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely stackable. I think you hit it right with your preferred game stack. My issue with the Jaguars, and we talked about this a little bit on Monday, unless I'm making this up, but like the target shares with Chark, they're just not that great. I will say Minshew's been really good in the 3 games with DJ Chark, so that makes me feel better about this game as a whole. Surprisingly, only 27% of the money is on the over on this game, according to OddsFire. I know the total is very high.
Yeah.
So it can still be a good game, even if it hits the under by a bit, but I feel like I'm limited with how I can stack it.
Yeah.
I don't think I would play Minshew, although it's probably, again, he's been quite good this year.
I'm not going to use Minshew. I am not considering him personally.
But you hate Gardner Minshew.
I don't hate him. I hate the idea of him.
Well, and he's played 3 games with DJ Chark. He's doubled up the league average on a per play basis in passing net expected points per dropback.
On about 20 dropbacks per game.
Do you want to guess how many pass attempts he has the past 3 games?
He said 45 and 40 the past 2 games Chark has played. I just pulled it up. Sorry, Gardner.
Do you know what's his floor in the 3 games with DJ Chark in terms of
20 points? I was looking at it just like as you were talking.
Like, he's been viable, and you and I have been pretty skeptical about Gardner Minshew. I don't know what it is. And I mean, we talking Indy, like
Minshew or Teddy?
Teddy.
Okay.
But we're talking game stacks, and is this a game where you can play both quarterbacks, or is it a 1 quarterback, or is it a 0 quarterback? This is very close to a 2 quarterback stack.
Okay.
And that always
I'll
makes
say
me
it's
feel
a
better.
1.2 quarterback stack.
I'd be like a 1.75.
Okay. I actually like that way that broke down. Okay, cool. Do you think that Deshaun is among the best quarterbacks in the slate? Because right now, if I have a single entry, I think Deshaun is my quarterback.
If we get to Sunday and everything's fine with the Chiefs game, it's going to be Mahomes for me.
Okay.
But if it's not, I think salary considered, Deshaun would be the number 1 then.
Okay, perfect. We'll talk more about Deshaun and player picks. We're going to talk about some bookmaker info in just 1 second. But first, speaking of bookmakers, betting on the NFL is great. Betting on the NFL risk-free, even better. FanDuel Sportsbook is giving you a chance to bet on Week 5 of the NFL season risk-free with their exclusive same-game parlays. Simply place a 3-leg or more parlay on any NFL Week 5 game to be eligible for the offer and follow along as the game unfolds. If you don't win your bet, FanDuel will refund your bet up to $10 in site credit. What do you have to lose? Disclaimer, 21 plus and present in New Jersey, Pennsylvania, Illinois, West Virginia, Indiana, Colorado, or Iowa. Refund issued as a non-withdrawable site credit that expires in 7 days. Max refund is $10. Terms apply. Gambling problem? Call 1-800-GAMBLER. In West Virginia, visit 1-800-GAMBLER.net. In Indiana, call 1-800-9-WITH-IT. In Colorado, call 1-800-522-4700. In Iowa, call 1-800-BETS-OFF. Let's take a look at what bookmakers are saying about this slate. We talked about the Falcons side earlier, but the Falcons-Panthers game is worthy of extra discussion, so let's go through that here. It's even better with the way the bookmakers have been viewing it, the bettors have been viewing it. The Panthers got pretty heavy money early. They were 3-point dogs at open, but it's now just 1.5. The total is held firm at 54.5, but 77% of the money is on the over at FanDuel Sportsbook. Is this a game that you want to build around in single entry? And if so, what's your favorite stack within it?
Yeah, I mean, I think this is the game that you look to first and probably second and third if you're trying to build a single game stack that makes the most sense from a process standpoint. I think we're both on the same page where we might prefer the Panthers more than the Falcons.
Yep.
So I would go Teddy uh, over Ryan in a game stack. And I think this is honestly a game where you could go like 4, 5 deep, even if you're
Okay.
stacking. I think Teddy, Mike Davis, Calvin Ridley would be like the obvious core, which
Yeah.
is a little strange because it's not Teddy with a wide receiver, but I
Yeah.
think you could throw DJ Moore or Robbie Anderson in there. I would lead more if we're talking like tournament game stack.
Yeah.
And then I don't think it's that wild to put Alameda Zacchaeus in there as well for the salary.
I think the reassuring thing for me is that if you go with Mike Davis paired with Calvin Ridley, like I think Mike Davis is super undersalaried. Like again, he should be 8,000. I'm
Yeah.
not going to back off that.
Yes.
Reggie Bonifant is on injured reserve now, and he did take away 10 carries in week 4. So Mike Davis might play 90% of the snaps. I don't know. Like their only other running back on the roster right now is Trenton Cannon, who is a special teams guy. He was awesome in Madden like a couple years ago because he's just crazy fast and he's on the Jets, and I would make him the number one on the depth chart all the time. But he's not actually someone the NFL decides to use as much as I do. So I think if I have a single entry lineup, I'm not going to be using Teddy or Ryan, but I will have a game stack in it, likely Mike Davis paired with Calvin Ridley.
Yeah. I have this, I don't know, this is one of those that I haven't fully like fleshed out or anything, but I've kind of started to think of running back salaries as just like a test. It's like, what's your snap rate, and then convert that to a salary. Like,
Yeah.
if you think a running back's going to play about 90% of snaps, those guys are usually like 9,000.
Yeah.
Mike Davis,
Okay,
like it's not perfect,
no, I think that's smart.
but I think Mike Davis is like undervalued based on that.
I'd agree with that. Yeah, he's like 1,600 undervalued.
And Todd Gurley at 6,700 is
Oh
way,
my
way
god!
overvalued.
Oh, that's hideous. Oh, that's disgusting. I hate it. I hate it. I hate it. Okay, so we are on this game for stacking. You said you like DJ Moore more than Robbie Anderson. Is that due to popularity or something else?
In tournaments, I like Moore because he's been underperforming. I will talk about Robbie Anderson later.
I think Robbie is a safer play, which feels weird to say, but I think he, like, based on his usage, he is the safer play. But for tournaments, I'd still like DJ Moore too.
Yeah, I'll say those same things later.
Oh, okay, cool. We kind of skipped around this one in the opening part because it's one of the COVID risky games, but the Chiefs implied total is at 35 points. They are 13.5 point favorites. I think it's actually 12.5 over the Radars. Nobody else has an implied total within 3 points of the Chiefs. So are you game stacking this one, or is it just Chiefs for you?
How do you even...
Well, Waller or Henry Ruggs. Ruggs should be back this week. I would say Waller and Ruggs are viable. You could talk yourself into Josh Jacobs if you assume it stays closer. If you assume the Raiders cover, which there's been some money on the Raiders. I'm going to look this up. But like there's been some money on the Raiders. And if you assume that they cover, Jacobs would be a part of that.
Yeah, and this is, again, one of 2 games where there's sharp money on the over. Right now, 45% of the bets on the over, but 65% of the money. Again, that could have a lot to do with the Chiefs, but that's another reason why I would put Patrick Mahomes as the number 1 quarterback, assuming this game plays as anticipated. I love the Chiefs, which is always easy to say, but I think it's one you can bring back. Again, underdogs don't really live up to their projections, like on a over a large sample, but obviously that doesn't mean that they can't ever overperform or put up a big game. So of the blowout games, this is probably the first place I would look for a game stack, even though the spread
above Cowboys Giants.
I believe in the Raiders, the Radars offense more than the Giants.
I feel like Moira Rose, weirdly pronouncing Bebe, with that, but whatever. So I thought there was more money on the Raiders. It's only 63% of the money is on the Raiders compared to 62% of the bets. So it's actually even.
But that's still.
Yeah, I mean, I'll take that over less money on the Raiders. The money line has shifted pretty heavily towards Kansas City, though, which is interesting. Actually, depends on where you look. The FanDuel money line for the Chiefs is minus 820, and it's minus 667 at BetMGM. You should price shop. Anyway, that was a weird tangent. I would say Edwards-Helaire is my favorite play in this game. I think Kelsey is 2. Tyreek Hill 3. Yes or no? Yay or nay?
I mean, are you including Mahomes in there? Or is this
I don't know if I'm going to get to Mahomes. I love Mahomes. I think I'm lower on him than you are, though.
Yeah, it sounds like. I would go Clyde Edwards-Helaire, number one. I'd probably put Tyreek Hill second, and then Kelsey among the flex guys. Kelsey's salary's up there at 78. Yeah. I would rather play George Kittle.
Tyreek's been getting really good downfield targets. So, and like we know, those downfield targets have a higher odds of converting, given his quarterback is decent. I kind of thought I might be into Mecole Hardman, but he's still his snap rate is still low. It was at 46% on Monday. So I don't know, man.
Ooh.
I think
I didn't realize. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
No, go ahead.
I just it felt like Tyreek Hill hasn't had a blow up game yet. He's scored in every game. He has not hit 100 yards yet. So he's been between 13.1 and 19.3 FanDuel points in every game. So very high floor. It is boosted by touchdowns. Maybe there's some regression coming, but
yeah.
I mean, 6'11", 6'6" targets. I do like him. And again, if the Chiefs put up 35 points, the odds that Tyreek Hill doesn't put up like 15 seem very low.
Yeah. Okay. So you have him above Kelsey. I have Kelsey slightly above Hill, but I think both are in play. I would say neither will be in a single entry lineup for me, though, personally. The Cowboys implied total is a 31.75, thanks to their 54-point total and a 9.5-point spread against the Giants. Both those numbers have held pretty steady since the open. Dak Prescott and Zeke fit what I'm looking for in heavily favored teams because Dak runs and Zeke gets targets. Michael Gallup kind of actually fits what I'm looking for, too, in heavily favored teams, which is scary. How high are you on the Cowboys, and which Giants will you run it back with if you decide to run it back?
I'm high on the Cowboys. It's very easy to get high on the Cowboys, honestly. Running it back, I think you have two options, and Evan Ingram. He's been an enemy of mine this year, but Darius Slayton, I think, would have to be the number one, right?
Yeah, I think Slayton's number one pretty easily. I don't know if that's like egregious, but I think it's pretty easy for me to put Slayton one.
Who else would have Ingram's not there.
Yeah,
he's not.
I think all the decent amount of Slayton, like in a single entry lineup, I don't think I'm stacking him with Zeke, but like in a lot of my Zeke lineups, I'll have Slayton there too, just because on the off chance that the Giants keep things safe. I'm not going to Daniel Jones, and I want to check to make sure you're not either, correct?
Jim, this is a one quarterback game stack game.
1.0, yes, I agree. The Ravens are 12.5-point favorites over the Bengals. Actually, wait, are you using any of the Cowboys receivers? Sorry.
Oh, yeah. Again, I think I have to stop being as worried about heavy favorite wide receivers because they're going to be relevant to put up points. I would go, because of salaries, I would put CeeDee Lamb number one, though, at 5,900 over Amari Cooper.
Kind of tempted by Gallup again.
Oh, yeah, we always are. But
he's averaging 1.75 deep targets per game, and he is averaging 6 raw targets per game. It's not great, but we know where those targets are, and they're all bombs, baby. And again, the odds that those bombs hit are higher when he's at home and projected to be efficient. I think Michael Gallup, 57. What could go wrong?
One lineup.
No, absolutely not.
It's Lamb.
No.
I made that mistake last week.
One lineup, I probably wouldn't use either, honestly.
Wow.
But just because I like other receivers more. It's not.
Okay.
Well, I'm using Zeke.
All right. Wow.
Wow.
Okay.
Well, one lineup, it'd probably be just Amari, honestly.
I don't think I'd get there in one lineup.
Okay. I would, because I've got the salary to burn with the running backs. If it's one lineup, I go Amari. If not, if it's a tournament lineup, I actually go Gallup, because why not? Okay. The Ravens are 12.5-point favorites over the Bengals, which puts their implied total at 32. Lamar did miss practice on Wednesday. Sounds like it's minor, so we're going to operate under the assumption that is true. He fits what I want in a heavily favored quarterback, and Hollywood Brown kind of does too with the high A wide receiver. Let's go. The problem is I don't want to run it back with literally any Bengal because the Ravens defense is so good. So how are you viewing this game?
Probably like a typical Ravens game, which means I'm going to be underweight on probably everybody. I will tilt the Mark Andrews double touchdown game again, but I can't go there with his volume at the salary of 7,500. I don't anticipate, and I like the Bengals offense, but just not in this spot. Mark Andrews, 6'3", 8 and 3 targets. Of course, 2 multi-touchdown games, but I need more volume from a tight end, honestly, at that salary to even consider him. Marquise Brown is going to be, I would imagine he's getting talked up a good bit by the end of the week. I've
seen too much buzz on Twitter for me to feel good about it.
Seems like it's the obvious buy low on Marquise Brown's spot. I've seen the videos of getting overthrown and everything, but honestly, it almost feels like, and don't quote me on this, but how many huge games has Marquise Brown had since that week 1 game last week? Has it really been that many, or does it feel like it's a lot?
He had the playoff game last year, where so that was actually a big thing for me because his snap rate in that game was more comparable to what he's been doing this year. So I feel like that, I know it's anecdotal to run with one game, but that one game was significant because the snap rate was so high there. He's had 86 or more yards in 2 of 4 games this year. So he just hasn't had a touchdown yet. Yeah, so the problem is if he's popular, he's such the avoid because he's going to be crazy volatile.
He's got a knee injury.
He has the, I mean, he was limited on Wednesday. I don't think he's hurt.
Okay.
So
but he's probably not.
I don't know.
Jim, nobody's 100% by week 5, so none of these guys are 100%.
Okay, so here's the way that I will discuss this is, let's say I have 5 Lamar Jackson lineups. I am actually going to put Hollywood in 3 of those. I would put Mark Andrews in 1, and I would have Lamar by himself in the other 1. How would you do 5 Lamar lineups?
Yeah, it's tough because Marquise Brown. Okay, so all right, Marquise Brown in it's probably the same, honestly. 3-1-0 because you can really kill your lineups when you stack the Ravens if they don't go off. And according to Pro Football Reference, Marquise Brown, week 1, 28.7 FanDuel points last year. No other games with 20 FanDuel points.
Except for the playoff game, I'm pretty sure.
I don't...
It counts because that was where his snapper was most representative of what he's doing this year.
Okay.
Yeah, get out of here.
Marquise Brown he's going to score twice and cash in on the touchdown regression, and I'm going to be tilting, but
he's going to score twice with 20 yards receiving on 3 targets. That's how it's going to go. I can guarantee it. But I will have exposure to it because why not? Weather. Almost every game on the East Coast this week has a chance for rain on Sunday, but none of them come with high winds. There's one exception. The other ones are all at or below 10 miles per hour. The lone exception is Browns Colts, where the wind speeds are projected at 12 miles per hour. That wouldn't be a huge downgrade, but it is worth noting, especially the total having come down a point there for unknown reasons to me. I wouldn't worry about them unless they wind up being legitimate downpours, and those are the only weather spots to note for this week. So with that said, let's dive into our positional plays. Starting off at quarterback, Brandon, who are you targeting on FanDuel for this week?
I'm going to go with Patrick Mahomes, number 1. I usually don't recommend quarterbacks at this salary, but I'm more okay with it because it's a week where a running back, there's just not a whole lot of places to spend. So I'm good with Mahomes as number 1. He's the best quarterback play on the slate when looking at floor and ceiling outcomes, and you can compare those two. The only other two who are even close are in his salary range, with Dak at a salary of 8,700 and Lamar at 89. But Mahomes is way out ahead of them, and I just really like Patrick Mahomes in this matchup. I think they put up the most points pretty easily this week in terms of expectations. Mahomes is in his own tier in passing net expected points per dropback among main slate quarterbacks, because Rodgers, Wilson, and Breeze are off the main slate. But that 35-point implied team total, he's such a huge part of the offense. And we don't think of him as a running quarterback, but I mean, he can pick up some yardage. He can steal a touchdown with his legs too, which is always nice. But my second love is actually going to be Teddy Bridgewater at 7,100 on FanDuel. If you filter out the underdogs by 6.5 or more, Teddy's fifth in floor ceiling ratio in my simulations right now among quarterbacks on the main slate. So it means there's some juice for upside. There's also a solid floor. He's at the NFL average in downfield attempt rate, despite an average target depth that's about a yard shy of the league average, just 6.8 yards per target for him in terms of average target depth so far. But he's a plus passer on a per dropback basis. He's in what is just kind of by default the best game stack with that tight spread. So, he's got 3 viable pass catchers if you include Mike Davis, which you know we do. Yeah,
you better say that. I like Teddy a lot too. If I have a single entry lineup, my quarterback I think will be Deshaun Watson, because as mentioned, should be a lot of efficient passing in this game, and Deshaun runs. One of the keys for quarterbacks who are heavily favored for me. He's had at least 5 rush attempts in 3 of the 4 games. We haven't seen a blow-up from Deshaun yet, but we know that he has that upside, even with DeAndre Hopkins being gone. The spread here also isn't as bad as a lot of other games, so I would say Deshaun Watson is my number 1. I was going to go Matt Ryan as my second quarterback, but I think I've talked myself out of him with Julio being banged up, so I'm going to go Dak. I know it's very easy to go Dak, but it hasn't gone wrong for us yet, so why not? We were talking before about how we need quarterbacks to run a bit more if they're heavily favored. Dak doesn't run in volume a lot. He doesn't get a lot of yardage, but where he does run is in high leverage spots. He gets a lot of red zone rushes, and I think that gives him rushing touchdown upside. He's had 29 or more points in 3 straight games. The Giants' probs aren't going to build a lead and force him to throw 50 times, but I think with his efficiency, with the possibility for rushing touchdowns, I am okay putting Dak up there. I think I have him as my number 2 quarterback right now behind Deshaun. I'm getting higher on Dak as the week goes along. Running back, what do you have there?
I think we're both, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but your 3 loves and Clyde Edwards-Helaire are just the top 4 for sure.
Correct. Okay. Unless Raheem Mostert sits, which I don't think he will. So, I think so.
Okay. So keep that in mind. But my number 1 then is Clyde Edwards-Helaire at 7,900. There's a huge implied team total at 35 points for the Chiefs this week. Edwards-Helaire is at 27.3 adjusted opportunities per game, which is 8th overall among running backs. It is 5th among main slate running backs this week. So pretty easy justification there. He has a 35% rushing success rate, which is not good, but he has 433 total yards, but 1 touchdown. Usually, and this is not perfect, it's pretty just kind of a catch-all number here, but about every 150 yards, you should score a touchdown. So he should be closer to 3 touchdowns right now, especially in this offense. Touchdown regression should be coming, and I mean, what's a better spot to get at when your team is expected to score 35 points? My second love is going to be begrudgingly, it's James Conner.
I think he's in that second tier. I'd agree with that. I think that's a fine pick.
Conner over Taylor. Are you there with me, or?
Look, if I'm looking at this from a straight up perspective, yes. Will I have more Jonathan Taylor? Probably also yes.
Yeah, that's how it feels. But Conner's 7,000. He's had 20 and 28 adjusted opportunities in his 2 full games, games in which he's played 77% and 66% of the snaps. The Steelers are 7-point favorites on the Eagles in a game with a low total of 44 points, but their implied team total then is still 25 points. Conner should get about 2/3 of the snaps in positive script. Even though the Pittsburgh offense right now is just middling, their defense, which is very good, faces the 30th ranked offense which could lead to some good field position. Because Carson Wentz is,
not as good as Jared Goff. Sorry. Whoa. Yeah. Was there a noise? What? Sorry.
Yeah. My third love is James Robinson at a salary of $6,600. I feel pretty good about that. But again, Jerick McKinnon would take the spot if Raheem Mostert doesn't play. And I would consider Devin Singletary if Zach Moss were.
There's literally a roadblock. Once he gets to like 17 FanDuel points, Devin Singletary, like upon threat of prosecution, must be the field.
I know. I'm just saying that's where we are with running back, where it's kind of hard to.
I would just use 5. I would not. Like I'm not going to get to Devin Singletary.
All right, you know what? I'm only going to name 2 then.
Okay. No, go talk to me about James Robinson. He's actually good.
So I'm really trying to avoid the underdogs. Jacksonville's a 6.5 point underdog, but I can only do so much with the state of running back this week. Robinson has 16 or more carries in 3 or 4 games, at least 4 targets in 3 straight weeks, while playing an average of 60% of the snaps. Played 76% in week 4. Ran a season best 56% of routes in week 4 as well. Houston's bottom 6 in success rate and per carry rushing net expected points allowed to running backs. So I don't mind James Robinson if I have to get there. But, I mean, just before we move on, should Derrick Henry or Josh Jacobs? Sure,
Derrick Henry's not going to play. It's not going to happen.
Okay.
Josh Jacobs, if I have enough lineups, I guess I'll get there because I would have enough to stack Chiefs Raiders, and I think he makes sense in that stack.
Yeah.
But I don't think he'd be a standalone play.
Okay.
Right?
Yeah, I'm with you. I want to make sure we're not dismissing some guaranteed volume from, Jacob.
I would say that it's a good week to have a tight core at running back just because there aren't a lot of good options.
Yeah.
So that tight core for me will involve Zeke Elliott for sure. As mentioned in the trends, if you're going to target a heavily favored running back, you need to make sure they get work in the passing game. And Zeke gets a lot of that. He's averaging 7.5 targets per game. He hasn't blown up yet as a rusher. He's had a lot of non-explosive runs. I think he's had maybe 1 carry over 15 yards. So he's doing his best Le'Veon Bell impression. But I don't care about the rushing efficiency. I just want the volume, and Zeke will give me that. So I like Zeke a lot this week. I also love Kareem Hunt. I'm just expecting a big role here for Hunt. Before the groin injury, when Nick Chubb was healthy, Hunt was still averaging 13 carries and 3.7 targets per game, which is more than 20 adjusted opportunities per game, and that will now likely go up. Indy's defense has been good, but the volume here should be great, and it's also, I think, a decent game to stack. So I like Hunt. I also like Mike Davis because this is a Mike Davis podcast. He has averaged 14.5 carries and 7.5 targets, which is 29.5 adjusted opportunities per game in the 2 games without Christian McCaffrey. He's in a projected shootout that I want to stack. So I would say if I am ranking them in terms of prioritization, it's either Zeke or Mike Davis 1. I would go Kareem Hunt 3. I would go CEH 4 and then Jerick 5 if we get no Raheem Mostert. What is your ranking of them?
Davis, Zeke, Hunt, Edwards-Helaire.
Sweet. Let's move to receiver then. Who do you have there?
I'm going to go with Calvin Ridley at 83. He's one of 7 wide receivers to average at least 10 targets per game. He's one of 4 in the main slate, the others being Amari Cooper, DeAndre Hopkins, and Jamison Crowder. The Falcons are 6th in one-score pass rate. The Panthers are 5th in success rate allowed to receivers, but I don't really feel threatened by that because of the volume. If I'm taking the savings at running back, it can help me get to Ridley, who should probably see double-digit targets. I would kind of bet the over on 10 targets there. Of course, he's not the only or the only wideout in this game worth targeting, but there's a lot of upside with the downfield work. Very few receivers even are in the stratosphere of Calvin Ridley right now. My second love, I'm going to drop the whole way down to 6,200 for Robbie Anderson. We both love DJ Moore overall. I don't want to speak for you this week, but I think we've already kind of said what I'm about to say, but I think it's Anderson being the better play this week at 62 compared to Moore at 66 in terms of floor. Anderson has a 25% target share. Moore's at 23%. Moore does have better downfield work with 2.8 per game. Anderson's at 1.5, but Anderson's been more involved in the red zone right now. Anderson has the shorter ADOT, which makes him, for me, a better cash play with a higher target share. It's actually 26% of the targets for Anderson in 2 games without McCaffrey and 15% for DJ Moore. I think Moore's a very good tournament play for touchdown regression and a get-right spot. But for the floor, I like Anderson. And my third love will be CeeDee Lamb. It sounds like I'm higher on him than you are. His salary is $5,900. It's a good lesson in market share versus volume. I know it can be hard to trust small samples when chasing raw volume, but we know the Cowboys want to throw a lot. They're second in 1-score pass rate, so I can kind of trust it here. He's yet to see fewer than 6 targets in a game. His average target depth has climbed in each game. He's had at least 2 high leverage targets per game as well. If you combine downfield looks and red zone looks, he had 4 last week. So even though he's got a 14% target share, he's averaging 7.3 targets per game.
Yeah, his targets per game is actually, I think, equivalent to Odell Beckham, or at least right there. So you're right. That does matter. I should probably be higher on Lamb, but I'm not quite there, partly because he's not that much lower salary than Will Fuller, who is my first love at wide receiver. Fuller's hamstring didn't seem to be an issue last week. He went over 100 yards for the second time in 4 games. He has 18% of the team's targets, even if you account week 2 where he had no targets while dealing with that hammy. He's at 25% if you do not count that game. The Jags they're Jags. He's a high ADOT guy in a dome at home. It's for $6,600. So I will just take the easier out here and go Will Fuller. I also like Darius Slayton. I as you alluded to, I hate chasing underdog wide receivers, but the usage and the matchup are both enticing here. In 2 games with no Sterling Shepard, Slayton is averaging 7 targets per game and 2.5 deep targets per game. You get that for $5,800. The Giants have faced 4 rock-solid defenses thus far, but Slayton still managed to post an upside game in week 1 with 102 yards and 2 tutties. So I think he gets back on track here, and I think that Slayton's a pretty good play. I also don't mind Olamide Zaccheaus. It's assuming that Julio Jones does not play. If he does, then I would just abandon ship here. But Zaccheaus had 9 targets in week 4, one of which was deep. He had 2 deep targets in week 3 and played 75% of the snaps in both. He's $4,800. I would not get too enthused about the volume in week 4 because it was a game where Julio was banged up. It was a game where Russell Gage had like less than 25 yards. Ridley had no catches. So I wouldn't buy too much into the volume. But despite that, he is low salary exposure to one of the few potential shootouts on the slate or back and forth games on the slate. So I will still go at Zaccheaus despite being skeptical of what we saw in week number 4. Other guys I would just note, just because like receivers kind of tough this week. There are a couple of names out there. I don't mind Devontae Parker. I do not mind Laviska Shenault, assuming he gets into full practice by Friday. Henry Ruggs, same thing. If we're chasing underdogs, that'd probably be my list. Any other names you just want to toss out there before we move to tight end? Michael Gallup too, I should say.
Where are you with Deontay Johnson?
He's probably going to see Darius Slay, right?
I mean, maybe. He's 58.
Oh, really? Wow. Okay.
Yeah.
Jeez. That's outrageous. Okay, so yeah, Deontay Johnson should work.
Yeah. Is he 58? That's what my spreadsheet says. Yeah, 58.
Okay, yeah, he's way under salaried, so sure. I think that's good. Yeah.
Yeah. Sorry. I know I killed it. Jarv? No. Okay.
Odell though, I would.
Yeah. It's a tough week. I think you probably, if you're not rostering Ridley, you can. I think Cooper's in a really good spot, but you can probably spend down a wide receiver this week.
And instead spend up a tight end, which moves us to tight end. Who do you love there with that in mind, Brandon?
Yeah, I'm going to go with George Kittle. I pretty much never recommend high salaried tight ends, and I play them even less probably, but Kittle I think makes a lot of sense. The salary is affordable at $7,100. Kelsey's 78. That's too hard for me to get to in most builds, but tight end to me is a mess. It might just be the way that I view it, but I'm going to prioritize a few higher salaried guys this week, specifically Kittle. I don't really even know. I'm not going to play Mark Andrews. I'm probably not going to be able to get to Travis Kelce and instead just stick with George Kittle. I'm okay spending down at the other positions, really. Kittle's at 26% of targets in his healthy games. He's averaging 10 targets per game. At tight end, the target leaderboard per game is George Kittle and Darren Waller at 10. Kelsey's at 8.3. Evan Ingram's at 7.5. So it's a pretty sizable gap for what you're getting from George Kittle. And really, if you project ranges of outcomes for tight ends, you see very quickly that only a few guys have realistic paths to big ceilings through yardage and touchdowns. We know George Kittle can rack up yardage. We know he's got the volume. We know he can get touchdowns. So I think Kittle, if I'm building a single lineup, honestly might be in there. And that's very strange for me on FanDuel. My second love is going to be Evan Ingram. $5,500 salary. I mentioned Ingram as someone getting a lot of volume, 7.5 targets per game. The efficiency is dreadful, but surprisingly, tight ends haven't been that bad relative to expectation compared to other positions when they're big underdogs, probably because projections are just lower overall. But Ingram's had 7 or more targets in 3 or 4 games. He's had at least 5 in every game. Dallas is not a defense to fear, so I think Ingram is appealing to me at the salary.
Yeah. I'll have some Ingram, but I'm not going to like it. I would instead rather go Dalton Schultz in that same game. He is averaging 8 targets per game since the Blake Jarwin injury. He has 1 deep target per game. He's also tied for the team lead with 5 red zone targets for the full season. And you get all that for just $5,300. So Schultz checks a lot of boxes on a weird slate. I think that he makes sense again until that salary goes up. I also don't mind Eric Ebron, who we have not even, I don't think we discussed him on the podcast the entire year, but friend of the podcast, Eric Ebron, I should say. He had a rough week 1, but the volume's been pretty decent since then with 5 and 7 targets the past 2 weeks, or the 2 weeks after that. He is averaging 1 deep target per game thus far, and he's facing the Eagles, who led up 15 targets to George Kittle, 8 to Logan Thomas. They led up 3 touchdowns to Tyler Higbee, so I think Ebron actually does work. We did not mention Mike Gesicki. Gesicki is $5,600, and I think that I'm not stacking with Kittle, but if we get a Jerick McKinnon spot, I would be okay with stacking Gesicki with McKinnon or just using Gesicki by himself. So I mentioned Gesicki as well as a tight end I am considering for this week. I prefer Gesicki and Schultz and Ebron over Ingram. That might be my demise given the volume, but if Danny Dimes is the guy who beats me, then he's the guy who beats me. What do you have at defense here?
Well, speaking of Danny Dimes beating you, I'm going to go with Dallas. 3,500 on FanDuel. They're 28th in adjusted defense based on numberFire's metrics through 4 games. They're 23rd against the pass, 18th against the rush. But they face the Giants, and Daniel Jones is averaging negative 0.11 passing net expected points per drop back. The NFL average is a positive 0.16. He has a success rate of 43%. The NFL average right now is 50%. He's taken a sack on 8.6% of his dropbacks. The NFL average 6%. Dallas should force him into negative game script, and that's where upside comes from, even if the defense is not particularly good.
Yeah, I think they are pretty much a lock for the defense I use in a single entry contest. Would you use them with Slayton? Because I would. Darius Slayton and the Cowboys defense in the same lineup, I'm okay with that personally.
Yeah, but it's probably not the best strict correlation, but the points that Slayton might score their only touchdowns.
Yeah, there was a game last year where Christian McCaffrey and the Atlanta Falcons defense were in the same lineup, in the same perfect lineup. So I'll do it because I'm not counting on points out of the Cowboys defense. I'm counting on Daniel Jones being Daniel Jones, coughing up fumbles, throwing picks, taking sacks, doing what he does best. I also like the Steelers because I think that I should have the salary to get to them this week. They are 7-point home favorites. The defense is rested up after their bye last week, and they have the highest pressure rate in the league right now, according to Pro Football Reference. The Eagles have one of the highest sack rates, so I prefer the Cowboys due to their salary, so that's where I will go most of the time, but I do like the Steelers are going up. I would also consider the Cardinals against Joe Flacco. the Browns, given that it's a decent salary, and at times the Falcons, just because I think they're $3,300 as home favorites in a game where we should see a decent amount of passing volume. So I think the Falcons are in play if you need to save additional salary. That is all the time that we have for today. Brandon, any final thoughts for you on this Week 5 main slate before we close up shop?
I think you can pinpoint some games you like, but for me, I'm, again, just not going for game stacks for once, and I'm just going to try to access as many favorites as I can because I think that's where the most fantasy points will come from.
Yep. Sometimes the optimal process is different than it is in other weeks, and I think that's the case for this week. So we are devoted to game stacks. That will be slightly different for this week because the slate necessitates that it be that way. Do not forget to enter the Week 5 FanDuel Podcast Network Listener League. Go to FanDuel.com/league/listener league, FanDuel.com/league/listener league, or check out the Week 5 recap post on numberFire.com, or Week 4 recap post, or the Week 5 preview post over there. Brandon, if people have questions for you on Twitter, where can they find you there?
I'm at Gadula13, GDULA13.
And I am at Jim Sannes, JIMSANNES. You can also follow the FanDuel Podcast Network at FanDuel Podcast. Make sure you are subscribed to the numberFire Daily Fantasy Podcast feed. Our Week 5 recap coming up on Monday on the DFS feed, also on the FanDuel YouTube page at 9 a.m. Eastern. We have a UFC DFS podcast via Austin Swain posted for Saturday at Fight Island. We have a NASCAR podcast coming tomorrow for the Charlotte Roval. So make sure you are subscribed to the numberFire Daily Fantasy Podcast feed. Big thank you to Calvin Theobald, our video producer, for on the video side of things here today. Thank you, Cal, as always. And thank you to everyone for tuning in. Good luck with your lineups. Good luck in the Listener League. Enter those Listener League lineups and other contests too, just in case you have weeks like the past couple weeks have gone. And we'll talk to you once again on Monday. This has been the Heat Check Fantasy Podcast, powered by numberFire.